Mr. Morrow, this community has a vision, and that structure is not part of it. You have 30 days to remove it voluntarily, or the association will take the necessary steps. That was Renata Birch, standing in my gravel drive in August of 2019 with a clipboard and a linen blazer that had no business being within 50 miles of a foothills property. She was pointing at my cabin, the one my wife and I had built with our own hands over 2 summers. She had been president of the Garnet Ridge Estates HOA for exactly 4 months when she said those words. And what she did not know, what she had never once bothered to check before driving her white SUV up my private road and delivering that speech, was that my parcel did not belong to her association. Not legally, not historically, not by any document she could have found if she had looked, which she had not. I want you to think about what you would have done. Your wife built that cabin with you. Your son took his first steps on the porch boards. The woman on your drive is pointing at all of that and calling it a structure. And you know something she does not. What do? I knew something about that hill that Renata Birch had never thought to verify, and I had 19 years of paperwork in a gray steel cabinet that proved it. My name is Dale Morrow. I am 58 years old. I spent 31 years as a licensed land surveyor and title researcher in western Colorado, and I know how to read a chain of title the way a mechanic knows how to read an engine. When Renata Birch pointed at my cabin and told me it was coming down, I looked at her clipboard and I thought, you have never once pulled this parcel back past 1962. I let her finish. Then I said, I'll take that under advisement. She drove away satisfied, and I went inside and added her name to the top of a manila folder I had been keeping since the week they broke ground on the ridge above me. My wife, Patrice, found the parcel first. This was the spring of 2004, and we had been talking for years about getting out of the city subdivision we were renting space in and finding somewhere with actual ground under it. Somewhere that did not come with a homeowners association and a regulation about gutter color. Patrice grew up in a farmhouse outside Montrose, and she had no patience for fences that existed for aesthetics rather than purpose. She could tell the difference between a fence that was keeping something in and a fence that was keeping something out. And she wanted nothing to do with the second kind. She saw the listing for the 4.2-acre parcel on a Tuesday in late April and called me at the survey office before noon. 4.2 acres on the eastern face of a foothill ridge in Garnet County, Colorado, listed by the estate of a man named Harold Pruitt, who had owned half the mountain before his family began subdividing it in the 1990s. There was a water tap, a gravel road already cut, and a concrete pad that had once been the foundation of a hunting shack that had come down years earlier. The price was honest. We drove out the following Saturday and stood on that pad and looked down the valley, and the light was coming in low from the west and laying gold across the scrub oak and the grass below. And Patrice put her hand on my arm and said, "We're building here." That was the whole conversation. We bought it in June of 2004. Over the next 2 summers, with help from her brother Ray and a carpenter named Tom Dix, who I had known since community college, we framed and finished a 1,200-square-foot cabin on that pad. Nothing elaborate. Cedar siding, a covered porch that faced the valley, a cast-iron stove for winter, 2 bedrooms, a kitchen built around a window that caught the morning light. Ray drove up from Montrose 3 weekends running that first summer, and he and Tom and I worked from 6 in the morning until the light died. Patrice made the decisions. Where the kitchen window would go, how wide the porch boards should be, what stain color on the cedar. She was a dental hygienist by trade, but she had a builder's instincts, and she did not ask permission before making a decision she had already thought through. Cal was born in 2006 and learned to walk on those porch boards. When Patrice got sick in 2015 and we understood where things were going, She made me promise I would keep the cabin. Not sell it, not let it go to anything other than family. She used the word hers, meaning the cabin was hers, and she expected it to remain in the family. She died in April of 2017. Cal was 11. I kept the promise. I kept the cabin, and I kept every piece of paper that had ever touched that property, going back to the original purchase. And because I had spent 3 decades doing survey and title research for a living, I had read the full chain of title on that parcel before we ever signed anything in 2004, all the way back to the original federal records, which is how I knew about the 1887 federal homestead land patent for Section 14 of the Garnett County Survey, which is how I knew, from the first day Renata Birch showed up with her clipboard, that she was pointing at a cabin that no homeowners association had any legal authority to touch. The Birch Stowe Development, LLC, broke ground on Garnet Ridge Estates in the spring of 2019. 22 lots on the upper ridge, graded and staked and plotted with the kind of urgency that suggests a man with a loan coming due. Warren Birch, Renata's husband, was a managing partner in Birch Stowe. I had watched the excavators reshape the top of the ridge for 6 months through the cabin window before the Homeowners Association was formally incorporated in April of 2019, with Renata elected president at an inaugural meeting held before a single home had been occupied, before a single resident other than Warren and Renata had any stake in the question. Her first official act was a letter to every parcel within a half-mile radius that she had identified, with questionable geographic logic, as falling within the association's jurisdiction. The letter arrived at my address in May of 2019. It stated that my parcel was functionally situated within the Garnet Ridge Estates residential corridor, and therefore subject to the association's architectural standards. I read it twice, checking the legal description in the letter against my own deed and the recorded plat for the development. My parcel was not in that plat. It was not in any plat the HOA had filed. The word functionally was doing the work of an actual legal description, which was not how property law worked in this state or any other. I put the letter in the folder and wrote the date and the document type on the tab in black marker. The folder went back into the gray steel cabinet. Then I called Gus Farnham. Gus had retired from title law the year before, after 30 years of pulling chains of title for survey firms, including my own. And he was the person I trusted most on questions involving recorded instruments and prior claims. I told him about the letter and about the development on the ridge. He said, "Spell the HOA name for me and give me the parcel number." I gave them to him. He said, "Give me 2 days." He called back in 36 hours and said, "Dale, I need you to come over and look at something." What Gus had found on his kitchen table, spread across 4 printed pages from the Bureau of Land Management archives, was what I already knew was there. But seeing it printed out in Gus's careful handwriting notes made it concrete in a way that the folder alone had not. The 1887 federal homestead land patent for Section 14 of the original Garnet County Survey carried a surface rights covenant written directly into the patent document by the General Land Office that restricted the application of any subsequent deed restriction, covenant, or association claim to parcels within the patent boundary unless all affected parties provided written consent. My 4.2 acres sat entirely within Section 14. The Birch Stowe development sat entirely outside it, up on the ridge in Section 12. The HOA's claimed jurisdiction crossed the Section 14 boundary without any instrument authorizing that crossing, which meant the letter in my folder and every letter that would follow it had no legal force. None. Gus looked at me across the table and said, "She doesn't know this parcel isn't in her territory." I told him I didn't think she had ever looked. He said, "Then let her keep going." I thanked Gus. I filed his 4 pages of research notes in the folder behind the May letter. I did not call Renata Birch. I did not write back to the HOA. I went home and I went out to the porch and drank coffee and watched the afternoon light come across the valley, and I waited for the next step. Renata arrived in person in August of 2019, which was the visit I described at the start. She had a second woman with her, younger, who stayed near the SUV with her own clipboard and did not speak. Renata walked the edge of my gravel drive like she was conducting a site inspection and told me about the community's vision. I asked her which recorded instrument established the association's jurisdiction over my parcel. She said the association's bylaws covered all parcels in the corridor. I asked her which recorded plat defined the corridor boundary. She said it was defined by the Community Standards document, which I would have received in the welcome packet. I had received no welcome packet. I told her that, calmly. She said, "Well, you should have." I said, "I'll take that under advisement." She drove away. That was step 1. By November of 2019, a formal compliance notice arrived by certified mail. The letter cited 3 specific architectural violations: unapproved exterior color, unpermitted outbuilding, and failure to landscape the eastern slope in accordance with community standards. My cabin was cedar, which I had stained a dark brown in 2011 with the same product and color I had used in 2007. The outbuilding was a 12 by 20 tool shed I had built in 2008, permitted through the county, with a copy of the permit in the gray steel cabinet. The eastern slope was native grass and scrub oak, which is what it had been when I bought the parcel in 2004 and what it had been for the 117 years before that. Each violation carried a fine: $400 per month per item, $1,200 a month beginning January 2020. I noted the amounts, pulled the shed permit from the cabinet and photographed it, filed the compliance notice, and wrote a short letter to the county building office asking them to confirm the permit was still on record. They confirmed it in 3 days. I filed that confirmation behind the compliance notice. That was step 2. The paper fine stood at $0 collectible, and the folder was thickening. In March of 2020, a second certified letter arrived. This one citing the cumulative fines as a recorded lien against my property. It was not recorded. I drove to the county recorder's office that same week and asked the clerk to pull any liens on my parcel number. There were none. The letter claimed a recording that had never happened. I asked the recorder's office to print a certified no-lien confirmation, and I filed that behind the March letter. Step 3. By the summer of 2020, a man identifying himself as a code compliance inspector arrived at my gate on a Wednesday morning in July. He was driving a white pickup with no county markings, no county seal on the door. Nothing official about it except the word compliance printed on a magnetic sign that was not quite flush with the door panel. He was wearing a polo shirt with a logo I did not recognize. I have worked alongside actual code officers in Garnett County for 30 years, and I knew every agency seal in the region. This was not any of them. I asked him to show me his county credentials. He produced a laminated card that I could see from 6 feet away, had been printed on a desktop printer, laminated at a copy shop, the logo the same unrecognizable one as his shirt. I did not open the gate. I told him I was not going to open the gate until he could produce a state-issued credential or a county-issued authorization on official letterhead. He told me I was impeding official compliance activity. I told him I was standing on my own property behind my own locked gate, and that impeding was not a word that applied to the situation. He told me I would receive an additional citation for obstruction. I told him I looked forward to seeing the documentation on that. He left. I photographed his truck, his plate, his magnetic sign, and the back of his car as it pulled away. I printed the photos that afternoon and filed them under a new tab in the folder labeled Fake Inspector. Step 4. In October of 2020, I attended a Garnet Ridge Estates community meeting at the county fairgrounds, which I had been formally summoned to by a letter that had no legal basis to summon me anywhere. I went anyway, because I wanted to hear Renata say the words in a room. She stood at the front in a blazer the color of fresh paint, pearls at her neck, clipboard in her hand, and addressed the assembled homeowners about the importance of maintaining the corridor's standards. When she reached the subject of my parcel, she called it the non-conforming holdout on the lower slope, and said the association had been pursuing all available remedies. A man in the third row asked her what that meant. She said it meant they were making progress. A woman in the back asked if there had been any legal challenges. Renata said the association's position was well supported. I sat and watched and said nothing. After the meeting, as people were moving toward the parking lot, a woman caught my sleeve near the door. She introduced herself as Deb Lorca. She said she was the HOA board secretary. She had brown eyes and a tired expression, and she spoke quickly, like she was using a window she expected to close. She said she had worked for Birch Stowe's attorney during the original development filings, and that she had seen an internal sales memo that referred to my parcel specifically, flagged by Warren Birch's team as a visual obstruction to the 4 premium view lots on the upper south face of the ridge. Without the cabin gone from that sight line, those 4 lots were selling at a discount. I asked her if she would be willing to put that in writing. She said she needed to think about it. I thanked her and went to my truck and wrote down everything she had said, with the date, the meeting location, and the exact words as precisely as I could reconstruct them. When I got home, I put that sheet in the folder under a new tab with her name on it. The financial motive had been what I suspected since the day I watched Birch Stowe begin grading the upper ridge. Now I had a name on it and a first-hand account. In March of 2021, the escalation moved past paperwork and into something more direct. 2 of my long-standing clients, ranchers who had used my survey services for years, called me within a week of each other. Both had received letters on Garnet Ridge Estates' HOA letterhead advising them that conducting business with non-compliant property holders in the corridor could affect their own standing if they later sought utility access or annexation consideration through the county. The letters were baseless. Neither rancher's property was anywhere near the HOA's actual recorded plat, and the HOA had no role in utility access or county annexation decisions. But the letters were written to sound like they might mean something, and both men were cautious by nature. One of them told me he thought he might put things on hold for a season just to keep the peace. I drove out to see him, sat at his kitchen table, and walked him through the legal picture step by step. He had been a client for 11 years. He stayed. The other rancher asked me to put together a written explanation of why the HOA had no authority over his property, which I did. A 2-page letter citing the relevant recorded instruments, signed and dated, which he put in his own files. Both letters went into my folder, along with my notes on the conversations, dated and initialed. By June of 2021, the paper fines had reached $17,400, none of it collectible, and the pattern in the folder was clear enough that I could have taken it to a judge with a straight face. Then, the July letter arrived. Certified mail. The letter stated that the association had obtained a county demolition order for my cabin and would be executing it within 60 days. I drove to the county building office that afternoon. No demolition order existed on my parcel. No complaint had been filed with the county building office. No county officer had ever inspected my property for demolition eligibility. The letter described a county action that had never occurred. I photographed the letter and drove to Gus's house. He read it twice and said, "Now we're in fraud territory." I called Deputy Shelton the next morning. Shelton was a lean, deliberate man who had been at the county substation for 9 years, and he had been patient and consistent every time I had come to him. He told me again that a dispute over HOA jurisdiction was civil in nature, but that a fabricated government order was different. He logged the complaint number 6 in the pattern, and said, "You're close to having enough." I asked him what enough meant in concrete terms. He said 7 documented incidents with written records, each dated and independently verifiable, would give the county attorney's office something to work with if it came to a criminal referral for fraud or criminal trespass. 7. He said that number like it was a fence rail he was driving in. I had 6. The folder held 6 tabs, 6 exhibits, 6 dated incidents, and a fabricated demolition order at the top. I went home and built a binder. 3 ring, 2 inches, labeled on the spine with the parcel number and the year. I transferred everything from the folder into the binder, organized chronologically with dividers. I ran a second copy of everything and sealed it in a large envelope that I gave to Gus for safekeeping. I told Cal that night what was in the binder and where it was. He was 15, and he understood what I was telling him. He said, "So you're ready?" I said I was getting there. 11 days after I filed complaint number 6 with Shelton, on a Tuesday morning in August of 2021, Cal called me at 7:54. I was at a water district survey site 40 minutes from the cabin, pulling grade stakes for a drainage channel, and Cal was supposed to be driving himself to a summer work program at a ranch 20 miles in the other direction. Instead, I heard his voice come through the phone stripped and tight in a way I had not heard since the hospital in 2017. He said, "Dad, there are machines here." I said, "What kind of machines?" He said, "Excavators and a flatbed. The gate lock is cut, Dad. They're on the road." I was in my truck before he finished the sentence. I told him to stay back and keep recording. I called Shelton from the truck with Cal still on the line, and Shelton said he was sending a unit. The drive felt longer than 40 minutes. Cal narrated quietly, his voice controlled, describing a second machine joining the first, the flatbed repositioning near the porch end. He said, "They're pushing the porch." Then he said, "Dad." Just that. When I pulled onto my road, I could see the cedar siding through the tree line, white against the dark scrub, already at an angle it had never been at. By the time I reached the gate, which was standing open, the cut lock lying in the gravel, the cabin walls were down. Both contractors were in unmarked work clothes, no county markings on anything. Loading cedar framing onto the flatbed with a small front-end loader. The concrete pad where Patrice and I had stood in 2004 was visible and cracked, chunks of foundation pushed to the side by the machine's bucket. I parked and got out and stood at the edge of what had been my property line, and I did not move. The contractor saw me and did not stop. Shelton arrived 18 minutes after I called him. He went to the contractors, spoke to them, took the paperwork they offered, which was a letter on Garnet Ridge Estates HOA letterhead authorizing the demolition of an unapproved structure on the property. Not a county order, not a permit. A homeowners association letter. Shelton looked at it, looked at me, and said, "Mr. Morrow, I need you to step back a few feet." I stepped back. He issued a stop work to both contractors and held them pending investigation. He filed a criminal complaint for trespass and destruction of property that afternoon, citing the HOA letterhead as the authorization document and noting that no county order had been issued. I stood on the cracked pad for a long time after the trucks left. The cast-iron stove was lying on its side in the dirt. The porch boards were in a pile. Cal stood beside me and did not say anything for a long time, which is a quality he got from his mother and which I have always been grateful for. There was nothing either of us needed to say. That evening, I photographed every inch of the site, noted every piece of damage, and had Cal plug his phone into my laptop so I could save the footage to the hard drive and to the external backup drive in the truck. Shelton's complaint number went into the binder. That was incident number 7. Then I called Gus. He let me talk for 10 minutes. When I was finished, he said, "Now you go buy the hill." I had known about the Pruitt estate parcel since the spring of 2021, months before the demolition, when I had pulled a title search on the surrounding properties out of professional habit. Harold Pruitt, the rancher whose family had sold off portions of the original Section 15 land beginning in the 1990s, had died in 2019, and his estate had been slowly liquidating the remaining acreage. One parcel remained unsold, 31 acres sitting below and slightly south of the Birch Stowe development lots on the ridge, parceled out of the original Pruitt homestead. At first glance, it looked like rough land with marginal value, no water tap, no road, steep on the north face. But I had read the 1887 patent carefully, both sections, and I knew something about that 31 acres that the Birch Stowe title search had apparently missed. The surface rights for that portion of Section 15 had been reserved in the 1887 patent under the same General Land Office covenant as Section 14, when Harold Pruitt's family had subdivided the upper ridge lots in the 1990s. They had conveyed the lots by a plat that split the surface and subsurface rights language in a way that left the original surface covenant still attached to the 31-acre remainder parcel. Birch Stowe had purchased their development lots through that 1990s chain without anyone noticing the reservation language still sitting in the 1887 patent below it, which meant that the surface footprint of all 22 Birch Stowe lots on the upper ridge sat on land where the holder of the Pruitt parcel retained a prior recorded surface claim. Not a claim that prevented Birch Stowe from building, but a claim that had to be disclosed and resolved in any title transfer or refinancing on those lots. A claim that, unresolved, would freeze every sale and every mortgage on the ridge. I had sat with that knowledge for 6 months, since I found it during the title search in the spring of 2021, and I had not done anything with it because I had hoped not to need it. After the demolition, I needed it. In October of 2022, 14 months after the machines came up my road, I purchased the 31-acre Pruitt estate parcel for $74,000 cash. The deed was recorded at the Garnett County Recorder's Office on October 19th. The recorded owner was Dale A. Morrow. I told Gus. I told Carla Dietz, the property rights attorney he had connected me with in September of 2021. I told Cal, who was 16 by then, and who sat at the kitchen table and looked at the deed copy I had printed and said, "So now you own what they built on." I told him that was approximately correct. Yes, I told no one else. Deb Lorca came through in November of 2022. She had been sitting with her decision for over 2 years, and something had finally moved her. She called Carla's office, not mine, and asked to provide a sworn statement. Carla called me that evening and told me Deb had located the internal Birch Stowe sales memo in her personal files, had kept it for reasons she described as not being comfortable throwing it away, and was willing to notarize a statement describing the memo's contents and her own first-hand observation of it during the development filings. Carla drove to Deb's house on a Saturday morning and came back with 5 notarized pages. I filed the copy in the binder behind Shelton's complaint records and the Pruitt deed copy. The binder was now 2 inches thick on either side of the spine. Birch Stowe filed a final plat amendment with Garnett County in January of 2023, seeking approval to subdivide 4 additional lots from undeveloped land at the north end of the ridge. The amendment required a public hearing before the County Planning Commission, noticed in the county newspaper and on the county website. Gus saw the notice the morning it posted and called me by 8 a.m. He said, "This is the venue." The Planning Commission hearing was scheduled for the second Tuesday of February 2023 at the county courthouse. I spent the 2 weeks before the hearing preparing. I ordered a certified copy of the 1887 Federal Homestead Land Patent for Section 14 and Section 15 from the Bureau of Land Management Records Office in Denver, sent by overnight courier, arriving Friday before the hearing. I pulled a fresh certified copy of the Pruitt parcel deed from the county recorder's office. I organized the binder with Carla, removing nothing, adding the 2 new certified instruments as the front exhibits. Carla prepared a short written summary of the surface rights claim, 2 pages, which I could leave with the commission if asked. On the morning of the hearing, I put on a collared shirt and drove to the courthouse. Cal was in the passenger seat. He was 17 and he had asked to come, and I had not told him no. The hearing room had 8 rows of chairs. Warren Birch was at a table near the front with his attorney, a man I did not recognize, and a woman who was taking notes. Renata sat 1 row behind Warren. She was wearing the pearl necklace. I took a seat in the middle of the gallery. Cal sat beside me. Warren's attorney made the presentation for the plat amendment, about 12 minutes of approvals requested, lot configurations described, utility connections discussed. County Recorder Judith Hensley sat at the commission table on the raised bench with the other 2 commissioners. I had known Judith in a professional capacity for 15 years. She was methodical and careful, and she had a way of reading a document that made the room quiet around her. When the commission chair opened the floor for public comment, I carried the binder to the podium. I set the 1887 land patent, certified face up on the left side of the podium surface. I set the Pruitt parcel deed, certified face up on the right side. I stated my name and my address. I said that I held a prior recorded surface rights claim under the 1887 Federal Homestead Land Patent for Section 15, which covered the surface footprint of the lots designated in the current Birch Stowe development plat, and that this claim had been recorded 136 years before the Garnet Ridge Estates, HOA, wrote its first bylaw. I set both documents on the commission table and stepped back to the gallery. Judith Hensley picked up the patent. She read it with her reading glasses down on her nose, turning the page once, going back to the top of the first page. The room was quiet. Warren Birch's pen clicked twice. His attorney leaned over, and they spoke in a low murmur. Judith looked up and addressed Warren's attorney. She said, "Did your title search include the General Land Office patent for Section 15? The attorney said he would need to research the question. Judith said, "The commission will table this amendment until that question is answered." She turned to me and said, "Mr. Morrow, is this a certified copy?" I said it was. She said it would need to go into the record. She did not look at Renata. Renata was looking at the table in front of her. The Planning Commission tabled the amendment that morning, and it was never resubmitted. Warren Birch's attorneys spent 3 weeks pulling the full chain of title on the Birch Stowe development lots, going back to the 1887 patent the way they should have gone in 2018 before they ever broke ground. And they found exactly what I had found in 2004. The surface rights reservation in the original GLO patent for Section 15 had never been extinguished. The 1990s Pruitt family subdivision plat had not resolved it. Birch Stowe's title insurance carrier received a claim notice and opened a coverage investigation. The 22 homes already sold could not be refinanced without the surface rights question resolved and disclosed. 2 homes in escrow could not close. A third buyer's mortgage lender pulled their commitment letter. Warren Birch was looking at a development project with an estimated $8.4 million in projected sales, and it was frozen solid. The resolution required my signature on a release of the surface rights claim. Carla managed the negotiations. She was calm and deliberate, and she had dealt with development attorneys before. The first offer from Warren's side arrived at her office in late February, below 6 figures. Carla sent it back with a counterproposal that itemized the replacement cost for the cabin, the attorney fees since September of 2021, the documented loss of business from the 2 clients who had been sent intimidation letters, and general damages for the trespass and destruction. There were 3 rounds. The final settlement, signed on a Thursday morning in April of 2023, included $410,000. It included a formal written withdrawal of all 7 HOA compliance notices, with a written acknowledgement that my parcel had never been subject to the association's jurisdiction. It included a written agreement that the Garnet Ridge Estates HOA would assert no future claim against my property or any structure I placed on it. The $23,400 in paper fines that Renata had been assessing since January of 2020 had collected exactly $0. Zero. Warren Birch had spent 3 years and the better part of a development project trying to remove a cabin from a sightline, and his own failure to read the chain of title had made me the holder of the instrument that froze everything he had built. I broke ground on the replacement cabin in June of 2023. Same pad, same footprint. The cast iron stove had survived the demolition, landed on its side in the dirt but intact, and Ray drove up from Montrose to help me reinstall it. Cal was there the morning we poured the new foundation. He stood at the east edge of the pad with his hands in his pockets, looking down the valley the way his mother had stood in 2004. He did not say anything for a while. Then he said, "She would have liked this part." I told him she would have liked all of it. The binder is still in the gray steel cabinet. I do not expect to need it again. Here is what I want you to take from this. When you buy property in the American West, pull the full chain of title. Not just the last deed, not just the last 20 years. Pull it back to the original federal or state land patent, because those original instruments sometimes carry covenants, surface rights reservations, and access restrictions that were never extinguished, and that do not appear in a standard title search limited to the last few decades. A developer, or HOA, can build an entire project without ever looking at the original patent. And that oversight does not erase what was recorded in 1887. Pay a title attorney to do a full search. What Gus found in 2 days of research in 2019 was worth $410,000 when the account was settled in 2023. If a homeowners association claims jurisdiction over your property and you have any doubt about the legal basis for that claim, go to the county recorder's office yourself and pull the recorded plat and the bylaws. Read the legal description. If your parcel is not in that legal description, the association has no authority over you regardless of what their letters say, and every fine they send is a piece of paper with no force behind it. Document every contact, every letter, every visit, every phone call, every person who arrives at your gate claiming authority they do not have. Date it, write down the content, file it. A pattern of documented incidents is what converts a civil nuisance into a criminal investigation and what gives an attorney something to work with. Build the binder before you need it. If you have had a run-in with a homeowners association or a developer who tried to take something that was yours, drop your story in the comments. I read everyone. If this story was useful to you, please subscribe so you do not miss the next one. Coming up, a retired county planner discovers the HOA that has been fining her for 3 years is operating under a deed restriction that expired in 1987, and she has the document to prove it. Thank you for listening.